Welcome to Masculinity Now with Arabella Tornau. Welcome to this powerful episode on Masculinity Now with me, Arabella Tornau, and my friend and guest, Kevin Hart. Through his own experience and life story, he specializes in supporting men and women on their journey through tantric practice to rebuild intimacy and trust and to release unconscious and conscious sexual trauma. This episode is very close to my heart because I want to spread awareness about trauma, especially sexual trauma, specifically in men. For that reason, in today's episode, we talk about how sexual trauma manifests in our bodies, actions, and lives, whether we can consciously remember it or not. We often don't know what forces are at work in our subconscious, why we act or don't act in specific ways, why we avoid intimacy or even love, and what wounds we repress into the shadow. We talk about what tools you can use to release it and shift it, what the Me Too campaign triggered in Kevin, how his life has changed since then, what tools you can use for yourself to build a real, loving connection with yourself and others, to show up wholeheartedly in an authentic way. We also discuss how we can create security within ourselves and not seek the illusion of safety and material wealth. Kevin also talks about the death of his mother and how to feel the emotions that come with it, so you can walk in acceptance and not in the shadow of pain. These and other topics you will hear in today's podcast episode. And if you would like to work with Kevin or contact him, you can find his email address below in the link box. With that being said, thank you, Kevin, and welcome to Masculinity Now with Arabella Tornau.
One of my favorite sayings is the only permanence is impermanence.
Beautiful.
Which, to me is just about like being able to detach from like holding on to things.
Yeah.
Whether it's recordings or chargers or articles of clothing or even by extension, relationships, people that have passed. Everything, at some extension of the time scale is impermanent.
Yeah. And about like really it's a detachment. And if you believe in this, there's also no such thing than death. It's just something that takes on a new form. And it's like, I personally believe like this grief that comes with death is just some form of like grief that just shakes us up to our whole being and to our core and to really realign us with our authentic self. I really feel.
Yeah, it's a complete shift of perspective. I mean, for me, probably the most significant was my mom's passing, and also my brother's fiance's passing last year. That one had a bigger impact on him, but it still hit me pretty hard. But when my mom passed, like everything changed.
When did she pass? When was that?
That was about 9 years ago, a little over 9 years ago.
And how did you deal with that?
It happened very suddenly, and because of all the things that happened like in the moment, I had to be the one in the family that went to the hospital to take her off life support, and kind of deal with some of the admin and kind of be the clear-minded thinker and doer of the group, because I was the only one that really had capacity at the time to do so. And in doing that, I buried some of my grief. I didn't realize it at the time. I compartmentalized it, and it buried into my system. And so for several years after her passing, anytime her name came up, anytime that situation came up, I always burst into tears almost immediately. And it wasn't until, and then, I did some, grief therapy and counseling. That was, helpful in those kind of days of acute, the acute grief where it was just so intense. But for me, the biggest needle mover was about 4 years ago. I was at a Tantra retreat, and we did a ceremony, both honoring the archetype of mother in our life, and then releasing them from the obligation to continue being our mother. And the exercise is essentially like partnering up with a woman and giving her a way to embody the mother. So a physical position, a little movement, even a kind of a catchphrase. And then she would kind of hold the space of the archetype of each person's mother. And the woman that I partnered with looked nothing like my mother whatsoever, but absolutely, absolutely embodied the energy of her.
Wow.
And when, I had her in this stance, and my mother was very kind and nurturing and loving, and she, like, her body movement and positioning just like nailed it. And then, her little catchphrase was this nickname that my mom used to call me. And as soon as she said that nickname, I just burst into tears, and I just like flopped into her arms. And for me, it was like a way to kind of feel that like final closure that I didn't really get to feel the last time I saw her in the hospital. To like just feel her, and to be like physically held by her, and to be energetically held by this like being, and to just sit with that and just let the tears go. And then we walked around the room and witnessed other people's mothers, and every time I looked across and I saw, my quote unquote mother, and we'd make eye contact, and just the tears, and it was so much being in the presence of my mother again that I feel like I got to release that grief that had been trapped down. And it's not to say that I miss my mom any less, or appreciate her any less, but the grief that was held in me has shifted, so I can actually talk about her without that like deep level of like kind of sadness. So for me, that was the biggest needle mover. And there's probably other layers of the onion, but that to me was the biggest one in processing that grief.
It's about the closure.
And actually the physical like embodiment, the moving, because we can do all sorts of like talk therapy and journaling helped too. I actually wrote her an email while she was in the hospital, just to express what I wanted to say to her, which energetically helped at least kind of express those things. But for me, it was like the physicality of it, like the embodiment of it. And it was a little bit like shamanic, and, we were kind of calling in, her energy into this space to be able to relate like that.
Yeah.
And it was so powerful for me.
Wow. Kevin, this is so powerful. I'm really grateful that you share this with me, because grief is something that many have a really hard time to process, and to even allow it to process, or don't know even how to navigate with that. And I know a lot of men actually also, because thanks for bringing this up, because it's another thing where I feel when something happens and you need to act, you need to react, you need to, be in the present. You don't have time to grieve. You don't have time to express sadness. In many cases, you don't even know how to express it, because you just never cry, quote unquote. And then you bury it so deep that it's so difficult to even get into the feeling of like, okay, now I have time to actually grieve, but you just don't know how to release it. So what would you say also in regards to really feeling the grief and feeling and the releasing in the body of emotions? What is like the number one modality, or like the tools?
Tantra.
Yeah.
For sure. And that word gets thrown around quite a lot these days, most often related to sexuality, but it's such a broader body of work. And there's another component within Tantra around emotions and feeling. And, emotions are all, a form of energy. And being able to release the emotions, emotional fluidity, being able to, when you feel it, to be able to move through it and really lean in so that energy doesn't get stuck and it can move. There've been periods where I'll feel sadness come up and I'll just allow it, and I might cry for literally 5 seconds, and that's all that's needed for that emotion. It's not even attached to a story. There isn't even a why. It's just oh, I'm feeling some sadness. Cry for 5 seconds and then it moves and then it's gone. Sadness. I'd say sadness and anger, at least is for men, tend to be the ones that were, whether explicitly or implicitly, taught it's not okay to express. We have to be tough. Boys don't cry. Tough it up. Keep on going. Those are the things that in the Western world anyway, we're often conditioned to believe. And anger, we're often taught as it's not safe for us to express anger.
Yeah.
There's a thought that, the world can't handle my full expression of rage. Someone will get hurt, something will break, I might hurt myself. And so, we bury those more challenging emotions and don't allow them to express. And through practice, and I think, it does, in my opinion, really, really help to have a coach or a mentor or a facilitator that can help you open up to those things. It's really hard to take it on by yourself. But to have someone that can prompt you, hold that space for you, encourage you, create the safety that you might need to feel to really get into the emotions. And then once you tap in and you get the felt sense of what it's like to really grieve, to really feel the sadness, and not to judge it, but to recognize that it's an emotion just like joy and happiness and celebrating. They're all forms of emotions, and they just have a different sensation, a different vibration in the body, and there's ways of expressing them, and to be able to allow them all to move.
How does a session like this looks like? How was it for you when you first experienced Tantra, and how is it for you when you facilitated?
Okay, so I'll break that down. Okay, how was it when I first experienced it? So my first experience with it, about 6 years ago, I came to this point where I, was proverbially looking myself in the mirror and kind of questioning, what am I doing? What am I doing with my life? Felt like I was in this rut, and just these patterns just kept repeating over and over. At the time, it was relationship patterns with my sexuality, some patterns around work and life, and just kind of feeling stagnant and stuck.
Can you name some of those patterns?
From memory, I wasn't really able to express myself. So I was finding myself in relationships that either were, really unsatisfying, but I didn't know how to express myself to make it more satisfying. I didn't really have the communication tools. I didn't really have the internal sense of self to really be, with my own integrity, to know what was true for me and what was authentic versus what was a projection, what was, my boundaries were probably pretty loose and leaky. So, a lot of people pleasing stuff. Regards to my sexuality, I think at the time I was still struggling with both premature ejaculation and also a sense of boredom, I'll say, where like a lot of the partners I had, it was, very kind of vanilla, and I was just like, okay, this is nice. And I just feel like there's something else out there, but I don't know what that is or how to get there.
So you felt unsatisfied and also like curious because you knew that there was something out there, but you just couldn't grasp it. Like,
yeah, so I would say it was both this like intuition that there was more to experience.
Yeah.
It was kind of, an awareness of unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
So like maybe, call it known, the unknown unknowns starting to become known unknowns. But, coming from a world where, my conditioning was around TV and porn and movies and schoolyard talk that was all, kind of the classic Western conditioning. And so I didn't really have a roadmap or a mentor or anything. And I just stumbled on this one woman's website, and it was like she was speaking to every one of the challenges I was having. And so I just took a chance and reached out, and we connected. And so I would describe her as like a tantric based sex and life coach, which is kind of what I became a couple years later. So I ended up working with her for a little over a year, and in parallel, a few months later, ended up hiring other coaches as well. So I started on this journey of personal development, and once I started pulling on that thread, like it just kept going and going and going and going and going and going, and it just took off into like a variety of different directions. I would say, going back to your question, like what was my first experience with Tantra? So in those early days, it was, she would hold space for me to be able to express emotions in certain ways. So for example, pillow beating, I never expressed anger or rage, and she encouraged me to beat a pillow and to be able to scream and yell and really allow, the energy of like killing or rage or anger to be expressed. So that was my first feeling of that embodiment. I don't remember specifically, but there were probably like meditations or prompts or something that she would give me to like tap into feelings of sadness or other things that needed to move, and would hold space for that.
Where did the sadness and the anger came from?
Where? You mean like what were the stories attached to them, or?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to know when you express the anger in the pillow, like the pillow slapping, and I'm like, when I was little, I can remember that when I was 5 years old and I had anger with me, I was like screaming in my pillow, and I don't know if you also did the same, but it was kind of like, because I did this, I have the feeling I was able to release the anger when I was a child. So when I now have like navigating through anger, that was like, yes, also the anger of my childhood in regards to, circumstances in school or like bullying or whatsoever. But so this is more my question, like, was it more like childhood attached, or was it more like the conditioning of the society that you grew up from?
I would say it was
relationships, or
it was 30 plus years of life circumstances presenting me with things that made me angry that I never expressed.
Right.
Ranging from, being bullied, or picked on, being physically hurt, being sexually abused, being rejected, being made fun of, being cheated on, being manipulated, being suppressed or pushed down, being abandoned, like all these things. I never allowed myself to like fully grieve or get angry about. I just kind of tolerated and accepted, and made myself small, cut off my voice, I felt very disempowered.
Yeah.
There was a trapped little boy inside me that didn't recognize my power as a man. And And so in my ability to express my anger, there's some beautiful modalities out there that allow you to express in connection with another. And I started to then actually to feel my adult strength and rewrite the story that, I wasn't big enough, or I wasn't strong enough, or I wasn't brave enough, or I wasn't whatever enough to stand up for those things that made me angry.
So how important would you say is expressing emotions?
Oh, it's absolutely critical in my sense, or my perspective, for having like a healthier, happier life, being able to relieve stress, navigate challenges in relationships, challenges in work, challenges with friends. Life has a way of constantly testing us, and there are going to be times when it's really frustrating. The saying, when it rains, it pours, can be absolutely true. You can have a breakup, lose your job, get kicked out of your house, someone steals your car, whatever it is, all happen at once, and it can feel like a lot. And having tools that allow you to express, move, feel those emotions, express those emotions fully and safely, and giving yourself permission to do so is, in my opinion, absolutely vital to being able to like navigate those situations, being able to regulate your nervous system.
And you mentioned that the number one tool for you is Tantra. So I would like to dig a little bit deeper on the journey that you've been on with Tantra, and also like what opened up for you, because you mentioned this like in the beginning, that with Tantra there comes a lot of like projections and a lot of like different understanding of really what Tantra is.
Yeah.
So if you can break down to me the sexual part of Tantra, but also like the verbal part of Tantra. Like you broke down a little bit in the beginning, but just to get back deeper into an understanding what you are doing right now also, but how it also shifted your own way of being. Because when you're a totally different person as you were a couple of years ago.
Oh, yeah,
So
absolutely.
I would love to know like the journey a little bit deeper.
Yeah, so Tantra is one of those esoteric bodies of work. You ask a million people, how they define Tantra, and you'll get 2 million answers. Mm-hmm. Because it encompasses so much. And there's, it's thousands of years old in its lineage, and there's various schools of it. There's various interpretations of it. And I'd say in its most general form, it's a bringing together of dualities into non-duality. So, recognizing masculine and feminine, and how they unionize, moving, recognizing emotions and energy within the body, physical body, how they all come together and harmonize and unionize, and just ways to experience the world.
Yeah.
There's one of my favorite books within the Tantra world is the Radiant Sutras, which is derived from one particular lineage in Tantra, where it's essentially 112 conversations between Shiva and his girlfriend, where she would ask him a question, he would respond with this kind of poetic answer that could be interpreted in various ways of meditation. Mm-hmm. And it covers things from like enjoying the pleasures of taste to ways to breathe, ways to move your body, ways to meditate in nature, ways to experience orgasm and connection and sexuality. And so, your original question was around like the sexuality component of Tantra. Tantra encompasses so much, and sexuality is explicitly a part of that, and that's beautiful. And so some people really focus on that, and that's okay, because that might be the part of their life where they're feeling the most emotional charge. And just the awareness that there's other parts in this greater body of Tantra work that are also just as beneficial and can also actually help support the sexuality piece. For example, the concept of pleasure. When we think of sexuality, it's often times in the terms of sexual pleasure, genital stimulation, and pleasure as a concept is much broader than that. Like, we taste something, like a sweet piece of fruit, that's pleasurable. We smell a flower, that's pleasurable. We have someone massage our shoulders, that's pleasurable. So there's all sorts of ways that we can experience pleasure that can also include sexuality. And so so Tantra allows this kind of more embodied sense of sexuality. You can bring all these things together. The kind of core principles of Tantra and sexuality, breath, sound, movement, are all ways to combine, regulate the nervous system, really help feel into the pleasure that our bodies are experiencing, and start to expand how our bodies feel pleasure, how our bodies feel sexual pleasure. And it can lead into these beautiful orgasmic experiences, these like really, it can even get otherworldly, and get into really spiritual realms when it's kind of taken to its full expression.
When you were talking, I had the question in my mind, like, what role does the emotion of shame plays into the work, like the sexual work? Because we are here in this world, and especially for men as for women, there is a lot of anger and shame and guilt stored in the lower centers, and especially in the area of the genitals, English genitals. And so I would like to know what your experience is with releasing those emotions from you, and also like with the people that you work with.
Yeah. That's, okay. Great question.
Very interesting that I couldn't say genitals without like laughing.
Yeah. So I'll answer that with an example from my own life, and just how I was experiencing shame, where it came from, and how I worked through it. So when I was somewhere between 12 and 13 years old, maybe close to 14, I think it was between 12 and 13 years old, I was molested by a classmate multiple times. I was still prepubescent at the time. And it was also during this period of school where I was much younger than my classmates, and a lot of them had already started going through puberty. And, there was this whole thing around like having a bigger cock. And, so there was already this, like, I'm more man than you because I have a bigger cock. And I was still this prepubescent boy. Yeah. So I was already feeling this like insecurity around that. And then this bigger guy from my class would come over to my house. We were friends, and he would essentially tackle me and pin me down and start playing with my prepubescent genitals. And I couldn't, I was much, much smaller than him, and I couldn't get out. I couldn't get away. And he would, say things. He would, just kind of do whatever he wanted to me. And there was nothing I could do. I felt very helpless.
Yeah.
And he imprinted in my mind this idea of like, my genitals are not good enough. They're not, my cock wasn't big enough. My, and that, sexuality wasn't safe for me because he was doing what he wanted, and there was nothing I could do. And it happened at least a few times. And I didn't know what was happening to me at the time.
Yeah.
And I didn't have anyone that I felt like I could talk to. I didn't feel safe telling my parents. I didn't know it was something that I needed to talk about. There was no sense of awareness of like, hey, this is actually like really inappropriate and not okay. It was just something that like I tolerated. He was, a relatively popular boy in our class, and I felt pretty helpless and powerless. And so from those experiences, I developed a deep sense of shame and insecurity around my genitals in particular. And then I buried those memories really deep. And I didn't actually have that conscious memory until probably 2015 or so. And as this Me Too movement started to rise, and all these women sharing their stories of, oh, this happened to me, 10 years ago, this guy did this thing, or, this guy did, oh, he did that to you, he did that to me too, and that whole thing. And I was hearing all these stories, and then there was just this light bulb moment, like, oh my God,
Me too.
me too. And all those memories started flooding back. And it started to make so much sense why I was never comfortable being seen naked around people. I didn't really have a problem with intimate partners, but I never went skinny dipping. I never allowed myself to be naked in a locker room. I just didn't want anyone to ever really see my naked body, especially other men. And, subconsciously, it's because I never felt safe.
Yeah.
And as soon as I had that realization, then it's like, the first part in healing shame is recognizing it and then naming it. And so I started to recognize it, and then I started naming it. And then the very first thing that I did in order to start moving through that shame, it was Burning Man 2016. And there was a camp that had like essentially a big naked shower party. And it felt super edgy to me. It was literally like dealing directly with that part of me that I was feeling shame about, which is being naked around other people.
Yeah.
And a bunch of my campmates were super excited to go over, and I had this decision to make, like, do I stay small and hold on to my story? And like, in the moment that I had to decide, I didn't sit with it. I just said yes. And that was enough to like override that ego trying to protect me. And then as we're riding over there, it was almost like I was biking in a dream, like, am I doing this? Am I doing this? And like, and then I just kept going, and I just kept going. And then we got there, and, we get inside the tent, and it's just a room full of like, I don't know, a couple hundred just naked people of all shapes and all sizes and all genders and all ages. And I'm looking around, I'm like, wow, everyone has their own unique body, and it's all beautiful in their own unique way. And I have my own unique body that's also beautiful in its own unique way. And so then, I look at all my campmates, and they're just like happily stripping down. I'm like, okay, here we go. And, off came my clothes, and it was just like this feeling of liberation. It was like, wow, like I can be naked too, and I can be seen, and I can be comfortable. And, I don't have to feel this shame around my naked body. And, so that was like my first moment moving through it. And then since then, I've had many other opportunities to be witnessed naked, whether it's, as a demonstration model for some technique, or whether it's, at a skinny dipping thing, or, some other, whatever, other erotic situation might involve being naked and being seen. And it's all been very healing, very nurturing for me. And it's just, it was getting it, so it was recognizing it, naming it, and then when the moment to make a decision that can change the story arises, to make the decision in the moment and not let the ego get in the way to try to continue holding you into your story. And it's also the felt sense of it.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, I'm not gonna say talk therapy doesn't have its place. I think it can be really helpful, but it was the physical sense of feeling my naked body being witnessed.
Yeah.
And that embodiment, because trauma lives in the body, and so it's actually going into my body and allowing the patterns in my body to process and flush out the old stories, the old memories, and start to create new stories.
There's a lot of powerful things that I want to say, but first of all, I want to say thank you that you shared the story with me, and that you opening yourself up, and that you can talk so vulnerable and open about it. And I can feel the power and the authenticity and the healing in my body while you are talking. So I just want to say thank you for me so much. And I want to get back, before going deeper into the trauma holds, the body holds the trauma, because that's a very powerful sentence. I want to go back to and ask you the question, because it was so buried into your subconscious. I do have friends and I have clients, and also my personal experiences in regards to intimate relationships. It's kind of like we don't know until we know what happened to us / for us. But when we don't stop the pattern and the behavior, and we also don't know why we behave the way we behave, because it's unknown. It's buried in our subconscious. And the mind and the ego does it out of protection and creating safety. Because when you are young, like you said, you don't know how to deal with it. You don't know that it's safe to speak to your parents about it. You just don't know that there was something out of alignment and out of as it was just not right. Just to know the right and the wrong terms. So my question is, how did that sexual abuse with this boy manifest in your life when you realized, wow, something happened to me? Like, did you find, now looking back, how this played out in how you interacted with women, or created the story of shame, what you just also said, in your body? Is there a different playing out also in intimate relationships?
So I think what you're asking is, did that trauma impact the relationships that I had with women over the years as well?
Exactly. And thank you for helping me to reframe the question. Yeah, exactly. In regards to relationships, but also in regards to your sexuality, in pleasurement and porn, all those things.
Yes. And there were multiple factors that all influenced the way I related to women, that influenced my relationship to my sexuality. To be able to specify which condition, which behavior was tied to that instance specifically versus all the other things is I don't know that I can tie it specifically to that, but that combined with the social conditioning I had around sexuality, growing up believing that, sex was this taboo thing. And if a naked woman were to come on the TV screen, my parents would cover my eyes and we just didn't talk about it. It was this thing. I remember one time I got caught having nudie magazines and, was really punished for that and shamed for that. And, as a side note, I've always found it so weird how much taboo there is around sex, but, we can watch violence and gore and it's just,
right.
Somehow that one's okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then without having much sex education, like learning about sex, essentially watching porn, that's the most explicit version of it. And, we hear women, moaning and groaning. We're not told that, there's also a lot of acting going on and there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes, and, that this isn't actually like how real people in the real world experience sex. What do we see in TV and movies? There's often a hot, passionate scene and, they come in the door from a restaurant and up against the wall and kiss, and, the hot passion and clothes come off, and then, penetration happens right away, and pump, and 30 seconds later, and they're having, multiple orgasms together, and then it's like, ooh, and so that's what we're conditioned to believe sex is, and so all those elements combined with the instances of the molestation that I was describing, imprinted in me, this, and along with also like being bullied and being physically hurt and suppressed and made to feel lesser than, like they all had some impact in my confidence, not necessarily feeling safe in relationships, not knowing how to, so I would get really anxious. I developed a challenge with premature ejaculation. And I didn't really have a healthy role model to understand how to engage sexually with a woman. So it was kind of like shooting in the dark, and I oftentimes used alcohol to numb out or give myself kind of that added sense of confidence, because I wasn't confident in myself. It was, like a social crutch. And yeah, just a lot of unhealthy behaviors and patterns. And I know I'm not alone in those things.
No, not at all.
And so, yeah, as soon as I started down this tantric path, I think it was within 1 month of hiring that first coach was the last time I watched porn. I haven't watched porn in, I don't know, 6 years.
Wow.
With an asterisk, I have made some videos with lovers that we did watch together. I quit drinking probably 3 months after I started doing Tantra, and every aspect of my life has improved since then.
Wow.
Every single aspect of my life has improved.
So what do you think is the connection with alcohol and not being in your body and having trauma imprinted in your body, like the connection between the trauma?
Well, it numbs you out, right? Like you don't get to feel.
Yeah.
And so you have less sensation. You just have less awareness. I'd say those are, the two biggest impacts. Not to mention, it also reduces. How would I say this? It leads to making poor decisions. Like it takes away some of that filter of like what might be a good decision or a bad decision. And so, rage often gets expressed through alcohol that is very unhealthy. People can get hurt, things get broken because it numbs out that sense of how to act safely.
Yeah.
You lose connection to your body. Like, you ask a drunk person to check in, like, how are they breathing? They probably aren't aware of that. How are they, where are they holding tension? They're probably not aware of that. If we're talking about sexuality, like you ask a drunk person, where are you in your arousal level? Like they might not know because they're lacking that sense of presence at the time.
Yeah.
There's probably like a primal animalistic creature that's driving the bus at the time, but the rest of the human sense of presence and awareness is totally numbed out.
You said something very powerful, like you didn't have a role model back then, and I wanted to ask you, what do you mean by that, and what for you what would you have needed in order?
Yeah, and that's not to say that I didn't have a good role model for how relationships work. Like my parents were actually great role models in terms of how to demonstrate compassion and love and caring and all those things.
It's beautiful.
But because sex was made to feel so taboo, I had no role model of what healthy sex could be. I didn't have anyone I could talk to. I didn't have any mentors. And I think that's a big missing piece in childhood, maybe teenagehood, I'm not sure the right age, but, maybe kind of that pubescent early teenage year education is like just what healthy, real sexuality can be.
What can really healthy sexuality be? How does it look like? What is your experience with that?
Yeah, well, so it's going beyond the idea that sex is just penis and vagina penetration. It obviously includes that, but there's so much, again, going back to the concept of sex versus pleasure, there's so much pleasure that can be had in connecting with another, in ways to relate to others, understanding just the basic differences between men and women at the physical level, the emotional level, the sexual level, the way our arousal systems work. There's a cool framework called the erotic blueprints that allows people to experience pleasure in the way that's authentic to them, not necessarily the way that, again, we're socially conditioned to believe.
Yeah.
That you can have a really incredible connection that maybe doesn't result in sexual penetration, or maybe it does, but it doesn't result in ejaculation, or it does, and just allow for like so much more. Being able to attune to self, being able to regulate your nervous system during a sexual encounter, being able to attune to the other, and having the communication skills to be able to communicate around your desires, around your boundaries, to be able to hold space for the other to express their desires and their boundaries, and to just create like a safe space to explore and expand together.
And you mentioned this also, you mentioned before, like especially like the feminine part and the masculine part, like understanding feminine and masculine energies within and also in the external. And I really feel there's a lot of mistrust that is going on in our world, especially also within. And I would like to know, how was your relationship, especially when you released the stored emotions and the anger and the shame that got imprinted from this schoolboy back then? Because how was your relationship compared to man or masculine energy?
It's a very interesting question. I would say it was very contrasting, because on one end of the spectrum, I had this amazing role model in my father.
Yeah.
And I still to this day remember a conversation we had probably 20 something years ago, where we were just having a one-on-one conversation, and he revealed to me that his father never said, "I love you." Even though he knew it and he felt it, he never heard his father say that. And he told me, he's like, and I'm not going to let that pattern continue. I want you guys, you and your brothers, to know how much I love you. And I just got the chills just remembering that. And I've often reflected on how much of an impact that one conversation has had on me. And I remember those words to this day, because it gave me a sense of what it looks like for men to express love to each other. And it gave me permission to love other men. And from that day, 20 years ago, whatever it was, whenever my dad and my brothers and I talk to each other, we always say, "I love you," because we do.
Yeah.
And it's okay, and it's beautiful. I say, and now, here in my community, I have some amazing friendships with some amazing men, and we say, "I love you, bro."
Yeah.
Because we mean it. It's a different form of love than, the intimate sexual love that we might have with a partner, a life partner. But it's still love. Like I love this person. I love who they are. I love what they represent. So that's one end of the spectrum, was this ability to really truly love men and have like a really special deep bond with men. the opposite end of the spectrum is not trusting men.
Yeah.
And not feeling safe around men. And there are certain circumstances that really trigger that mistrust. And I think a lot of it comes up in relation specifically to sexuality and relation to kind of the competition, the little unspoken competition amongst men for women. There have been several instances in my life where I had been very trusting, and there were things that happened that broke my trust, and so those things combined with what this guy did over the years just built up this also mistrust of men and their judgment around relating to women. And if in some of my experimentations with open relating or even in a monogamous relationship, but with some of the guy friends that my partner at the time had. Mm-hmm. And so I had that, both this beautiful loving connection with men, but also a deep mistrust, most specifically in relation to women and relating.
And how do you navigate this in your current life?
I think one of the biggest ways I've been navigating it is coming more into my power around my boundaries and being able to express more about what I'm okay with, what I'm not okay with. And then if someone crosses the line, being able to express that. And there have been multiple men that I've cut out of my life in the past year that crossed my boundaries. Yeah. And I expressed that. And I'm going to give myself credit for being able to express it without projecting, but to hold true to how their actions impacted me, and calling them out on behavior that I didn't feel was appropriate, and how it broke the trust that I had. And yeah.
So what would you say is the power of also letting go in regards to personal development?
It's a more nuanced answer than just a black or white, letting go. I would say it's more, in some cases, closing of a chapter in a book, where maybe there's a connection with a friend. For example, when I was living in California, I had a lot of friends around me from my grad school. Dear friends, spent a lot of time together. And in the years since then, the chapter of our relationship called living by each other, spending a lot of time together, that chapter is over. Mm-hmm. The new chapter is called our friendship looks another way. And, maybe it's checking in on birthdays or holidays, or, spontaneous, hey buddy, haven't talked to you in a while. What's going on? Would love to catch up. And so it's just a new chapter. And in some cases, there are people that I haven't spoken to in several years that I still care about and I still think about, and I still know that there's an energetic bond, even though we don't connect. And in other cases, maybe there's a relationship that, the chapter that closed might be the final chapter in that book.
Yeah.
And, taking inventory of where I want to spend my energy and who I want to spend my energy on, and knowing that there's people in my life that will add to my energy, add to my life, and there's people that will be more of a drain on my life. Mm-hmm. And there might be relationships where at the time I felt like it was beneficial to my life, it was adding to my life, and over time maybe that relationship shifted and it became a drain on my life. And I'm trying to minimize the amount of things in my life that are draining. So, if there's a connection I have with someone that feels like it's become a drain, then I try to minimize the impact. And if that means cutting someone fully out or reducing my interactions or even having a conversation, there's several ways of handling that. And knowing that we have so many people coming through and leaving, it gives you many quick experiences of building a connection, and then that person might be leaving. You're going to LA tomorrow.
Yeah.
So we have this thing called a relationship here, and tomorrow you'll leave. Yeah. So, this would close out our chapter of this together. And the next chapter would be staying in touch remotely. And that would be a different chapter. Yeah. And so there's a lot of relationships that for me that have been like that, because there's been this transient nature where we have this beautiful thing and I appreciate it for what it is. And then if I leave or that person leaves, usually, to be able to be like, great, and that person's going on, and if we're meant to come back into physical proximity, we'll write a new chapter, and just like embracing the idea that each chapter is beautiful in its own way, and being open to whatever the next chapter is.
That's beautiful. And this is, I feel like, a sort of like really stepping into your power, into your gift, and becoming free again.
Freedom. Absolutely.
It's the freedom.
Yeah.
Because overall, we want to be free.
Yeah.
We want to feel free. We want to be free. And our society, at least that's why my personal opinion is, that a lot of our beliefs is we find freedom through chasing after certain material statuses, after money, after fame, after success, after woman, whatsoever. But then there's one point in life where we are invited, and many times this point is not a very pleasant turning point in our life. It can be an accident, it can be death, it can be something that is just really shaking you down to your core. Mm-hmm. And really remembers you of your deep need of connection, to connection to yourself. And what would you say until today really changed your whole sense of connecting to yourself and your whole sense of how you see life?
I think going back to what we first talked about, the first pivotal moment for me would have been my mom's passing.
Yeah.
Which, that was my catalytic shake me to the core moment, because it happened very quickly and very, very surprisingly, very suddenly. And, in that moment, I quickly realized the difference between big and little things in life and the perspective, so like my perspective shifted instantly. And then I became more and more aware of those things. And, when like little things, for example, something happens at work, or like having an argument with a partner, or not getting chosen for some project or something, it can feel impactful. But at the end of the day, you still have a lot of things to be grateful for: your health, your well-being, there are people in everyone's life that loves and cares about them. In some cases, it's friends or, mentors. In other cases, it's family, whoever that looks like. And when big things arise, it quickly makes those other things, it puts it into perspective. It's like, okay, I can handle this thing not being the way that I expected it to go. Mm-hmm. Releasing the expectation of the result. And so when my mom's passing, it brought the rest of our family together. My mom was like the glue that had held us all together. We always loved each other, but she was the one that really brought us together and kept us in communication and brought us together for the holidays. And so we then quickly kind of absorbed elements of my mom's being and became the glue for each other. And then from that next year, I started opening up to the possibility that I could live in a way that felt more authentic to me. I think up until that point, I was living the way I thought I was supposed to live, which in the US was, you go to school, you study hard, you get good grades, you go to a good university, you study hard, you get good grades, you graduate, you get a good job, you meet a partner, you get married, and you buy a house together and white picket fence, 2 kids and dogs and cats, and this quote unquote American dream that was generally pretty linear. And when I started to let go of that trajectory and allow myself the possibility of living another way, I started to feel more free and I started to feel more authentic. I went to my first Burning Man, and then I started doing other things that allowed more parts of me to express. Starting leaning into, again, as I mentioned, sexual growth and personal growth. Starting to be able to express more, starting to allow my body to dance and to sing and to be able to start having more authentic conversations, and to do it without alcohol. So, just like wholesale changes to become more of who I felt like I really could be. It felt more authentic to me. And so I made a decision to let my previous life go, and step into the unknown. And it was scary as hell at the time. And, there's still big unknowns that come up in this kind of lifestyle, but it's been one of the greatest decisions I've made. And I feel healthier and happier and more connected to myself and others than I can ever remember feeling.
I'm sitting here and smiling and looking at you and nodding and just being so grateful for having those heart-to-heart conversations, because this is authentic stuff and this is what is life all about. And what would you recommend someone who is on the path of taking the leap into the unknown, but has a lot of fear and is dealing with the fear, and especially, the financial security, or like all those beliefs that the mind created story to keep you safe, and who feels the pull to lean towards his soul purpose or the need to explore deeper his depth?
Yeah. So it depends, because everybody is different. So to give one single blanket recommendation, I don't think is appreciating the nuances of everyone's circumstances.
Yeah.
Generally, I would say get support, because it can be really tough to do it on your own. In my case, I had the support of a tantric mentor and a community of people around me that were there to hold me as I was taking that big step into the unknown. There's tons of people out there that are ready and willing to support people that are ready to take that big step. I'd say also taking a look inside and understanding where the fear comes from and what the story is that's driving that fear. For example, if you're working in the corporate world and you're considering becoming a entrepreneur and starting a new business, there could be a story called, if I quit my corporate job, then I won't be making any money. And if I'm not making any money, then maybe I'm not attractive, or maybe, I won't be able to afford my rent, or maybe whatever it is. But understanding whatever that story is and getting familiar with it, and then really sitting with, is that story true? Because a lot of times we'll tell ourselves these stories that aren't necessarily true. And those stories and our interpretation of the answer are the things that really hold us back. And that's where having, a coach or a mentor or a guide can really help in supporting you to move past that story and rewrite that story, or take that first step, and recognizing the story is the first part in overcoming it, and also taking a decisive, clear action is the next big part in rewriting that story. And again, it's not talking it out, it's not journaling it out, it's taking an action, it's embodying it is what's really going to move the needle.
My next question would have been, what does being true embodied really means to you? Like, how important is it to be truly embodied?
In my opinion, it's really important. We live in our bodies, and we experience the world through our bodies. There's other parts of our being. There's our emotional body, there's our energetic body, and our spiritual bodies, our archetypal bodies, and all that. But we experience the world through our body, and so the more we can kind of bring ourselves back to presence and what our body's experiencing, the more we can experience the world, the more we can experience connection, the more we can experience pleasure, the more we can navigate and move through things in a more easeful, flowing manner.
A very important question for me is, how does your heart feel since you took this leap, moved through the unknown, healed your emotional trauma, and living the life where you feel the most authentic self?
Yeah. How does my heart feel? So just to quickly reframe one of the things you said, healed my traumas. I think we're layers of onions, and we'll be peeling back layers of the onion our entire lives. I don't think there's a state called fully healed, but there's states that will feel more fully functional, where we've addressed these big things that are really impacting our behavior in a way that we don't want them to. And I've addressed a lot of the kind of low-hanging fruits, the outer layers of the onion, and I can imagine there's deeper layers of the onion that maybe will surface, or I might have an interaction with someone that triggers another layer. It's oh, there's something else. Okay, cool, let's work on that. So just a caveat that I don't consider myself nor anyone fully quote unquote healed, but in the process of healing and developing and growing.
There's a really powerful sentence that my mentor once said to me. He's like, as soon as we I'm rephrasing sentences, but this really got so embedded within my being that I want to pinpoint this out. So it's really this sentence of the only healing is necessary from the belief that healing is required in the first place. And it's just how it is. It's a label that we use in the healing world, the spiritual world, or the unfolding of development. There is no such thing than healer whatsoever, but it's something where we feel, let's phrase it this way, like a fragmentation of your soul we bring back into our being to feel a sense of wholesome again. So pinpointing this out, how does your heart feel since you started to become aware of the different layers of the onion that you call back because you regain your power?
I would say my heart, my soul, my everything just feels more alive, more present, more expanded. And it's not to say that I don't have challenges. I still go through challenges just like every other human on earth.
Yeah.
But I feel more empowered. I feel more prepared with tools and ways to help my nervous system, my physical body. I feel like I've got a greater perspective, and I feel like I can recognize those stories, which help me then move through them much more quickly. And so when I need support, I can be much more focused with it, and I can really lean in. And I think, also as a result of having worked with many people, support figures, I know better what I need and better um, what my style of support is, and how people can support me. So I have a better filter of who I turn to support me.
Was it difficult for you in the beginning to ask for help or for support?
There were certain things, absolutely, because it was still buried in that shame story. So, I might ask for help for things related to something, but not actually speak the thing itself. And then actually getting able, premature ejaculation is a great example of that. For most of the years that it affected me, I never ever spoke of it. I never admitted it was an issue. I was ashamed of it, and I buried it very, very deeply. And finally being able to talk about it and ask for support directly with that was how I was able to then start to make shifts and actually move the needle in rewiring my body to not experience that.
This part will sound a little bit different because we were cutting in 2 questions that I have for Kevin and his answers after our recording. It's about the topic of pre-ejaculation and why it can be related to sexual trauma. And I personally felt it would be beneficial for you to get more in-depth clarity around this topic. I would like to go a little bit deeper into what you mentioned also before. I would like to know if or was pre-ejaculation for you related to your sexual trauma, and if yes, how was it related?
I think it certainly had some impact, for sure. I think there were several things that were part of the cause. But I think that certainly had an impact. It impacted my confidence in my body, and it introduced a significant body insecurity, especially around my genitals. I think it left me feeling anxious as a sexual being and around sexual contact, and certainly feeling unsafe around sexual contact. And I think those anxieties had a lot to do with the premature ejaculation I'd been experiencing.
So what can be the reasons for pre-ejaculation? And the other question that I also have is, what can you personally recommend for men who are dealing with it?
There's several contributing factors. A big one is the state of the nervous system. So for men that tend to be very anxious or high-strung, their sympathetic part of their nervous system is quite active. And ejaculation is a sympathetic nervous system response. So they're already kind of in that same space. And so there's a strong relation to an active sympathetic nervous system and ejaculation. Another one is having a lot of tension in the body. For example, in the pelvic floor, sexual energy wants to move freely and flow freely, as does any energy. It wants to be able to move. And if there's too much tension, the only place for it to go is out. And so having a lot of tension, especially in the pelvic floor, can actually contribute to premature ejaculation. Another major influence is the sexual wiring, and how we've trained our body to respond to sexual responses. Many men's self-pleasure habits involve trying to reach ejaculation as quick as possible. Maybe they've only got a few minutes before work or after, before going to bed, before their partner comes home before the kids wake up, whatever the cause is, it's often a very quick practice, and there's oftentimes shame around not wanting to get caught. And so what are we doing? We're literally wiring our body to say, okay, for sex, we want to get off as quickly as possible. And then when we actually go into sex, we're trying to last longer and have this elongated experience. So there's an incongruency between how we're training our body to experience sex and how we're actually wanting to experience it with a partner. So when our self-pleasure habits are another major contributing factor, and as well as the influences of what we're told sex is. We look at TV and movies, and what do we see in sexuality? We see, oftentimes a couple entering an apartment, passionate kissing, and within a minute or two, clothes are off and they're on the bed or up against a wall, and big simultaneous orgasms after 30 seconds, and that's sex, and that's what we see. We look at porn, and it's very tension and thrusting, and it's all focused on the money shot. So it's geared for a man's ejaculation, and so that can also leave an imprint that sex is short and it's ejaculation focused. And then sexual traumas can be another one. If someone is led to feel, from some history of, being abused, that their body, might have a trauma response that results in premature ejaculation as well. So there's a whole variety of things that can contribute, and there's probably others that I didn't even name. And so what can be done? Well, the good news is that I believe that any man that feels burdened by premature ejaculation absolutely has the ability to shift that. I believe that every man has the possibility to experience sex freely without feeling the burdens, the anxieties, the shame, the guilt, whatever it is they're feeling around premature ejaculation, and to be able to choose if and when they want to ejaculate. And that it's actually up to them, and it's not some mysterious response of their body that they don't feel control over. And it really involves just a reprogramming of the body's sexual response. And what I usually suggest as a first step is introducing an intentional, more embodied approach to self-pleasure. So rather than opening up a laptop or staring at your phone for a few minutes and looking at porn and trying to get off as quickly as possible, really spending 15, 20, 30 minutes pleasuring the body, and the whole body. Yes, the genitals, but also the whole body, to be able to build the body's ability to hold pleasure, to expand the body's capacity to hold pleasure, so that when you're in a sexual encounter and you're wanting to last 15, 20, 30 minutes or longer, that your body's used to that. It's been trained for that. And then also pelvic floor health. Many men have probably heard about Kegels, and it's oftentimes advertised as a silver bullet cure for premature ejaculation. But oftentimes what happens is men are doing their Kegels and they're experiencing it more. They're experiencing it even quicker. And what's probably happening there is they're introducing too much tension to their pelvic floor. And again, the sexual energy wants to move, and if the pelvic floor is too tense, the only place for it to go is out. And so to counterbalance that, introducing a technique called reverse Kegels. So reverse Kegels would be like a yoga to Kegels would be like going to the gym. And so it's a nice counterbalance to bring relaxation and to bring a sense of almost stretching to the pelvic floor. And reverse Kegels can actually be really effective
in helping to regulate arousal as arousal's building in an encounter. Another important concept to understand is presence, and understanding where in your arousal process your body is, and being able to track that and being aware of it, being aware of little signals that your body is telling you of where you are. You know, if you're getting close to the ejaculation function turning on, or where you are in your process. So really having presence, having an awareness, and I think of it in terms of a arousal staircase, and premature ejaculation is often like a gap up in the steps. So if you're at say a 5 or 6 of arousal, premature ejaculation might look like going from a 5-6 to like a 10. And so you miss a part of the curve, or maybe even lower. It could be from like a 2-3 up to a 10. And so what we're trying to do is essentially flatten that curve. Unfortunately, borrowing from COVID terms, but it's a good analogy. We're trying to flatten the curve, and so things like reverse Kegels can help actually regulate the arousal and modulate the arousal, so that we have more intentionality to how much we go up and how quickly we go up. And then another series of techniques is around nervous system regulation. So, I talked a little bit about, ejaculation as a sympathetic nervous system function. So techniques that can help introduce parasympathetic nervous system to that the rest relax, to help take the edge off that sympathetic system. And so things like breath. Breath is an amazing tool to use intentionally in sex. It can be both sympathetic and very stimulating, but it can also be parasympathetic and very soothing and help us with regulating and moving sexual energy, and even getting into some of these heightened states of arousal. For people that are familiar with the tantric world, may have heard of energetic orgasms and non-ejaculatory orgasms, and breathing is a big part of that. And it's a great tool for regulating the nervous system. Sound is another one. So being able to sound at an energetic level, it opens the body to energy moving, and then at a physical level, like it even vibrates the vagus nerve, the nervous system that is responsible for the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and it helps the body go into these parasympathetic states. So, sounding is another important one, and men are oftentimes not given permission or conditioned to sound. So being able to sound can be really helpful, and then movement as well. Like, what do we see in porn? We often see a man that's very flexed, and it's just a in, out, in, out, in, out, and having open hips, a very mobile spine, yoga, qigong, things that help the body open up and and be able to move freely. Then you can literally help move that buildup of sexual energy that's in the genitals, so that it's not stuck there, and it can move throughout the rest of the body. So those are some, I would say, some core principles. There's a variety of other techniques out there, but I would say those ones are kind of at the core to most pathways to moving through premature ejaculation. So
yeah, that's huge. So really using also the gifts that God, the universe, gifted us with, the power of our voice, our body, everything holds. And rephrasing, getting back to what you said before, our body holds our trauma. We can see just by looking in people's eyes or hearing how they talk, how they walk through life, how they carry themselves through life, what type of trauma they have, or if they have a trauma or whatsoever. I mean, no one is immune to trauma. We all carry this to one in a larger degree. Just to round it up also in regards to the work that you do. When someone listens to this podcast episode right now and realizes, yes, this is really resonating with me, I feel the same. Everything what Kevin said today was something that I feel within me. I want to take the next step. How does it look like in regards to the work, in regards to really getting familiar to the path of releasing the story, releasing the trauma, and also getting familiar with Tantra?
There are a variety of answers to that.
And slash working with you.
Yes. So the first step is recognition. So recognition that you're ready. I think there's a beautiful framework called the 4 stages of competency. The first stage being unconsciously incompetent, and this is where you're moving through life with some things in your life that just aren't working the way that you would ideally want them to, but you're not even bringing conscious awareness to it. And so you're not trying to do anything about it. You're just accepting and tolerating it, and life could be better, and you're not even trying to make it better. And then the second phase, which is what I think you just described, which is consciously incompetent, is when you become aware of this thing and you're not quite sure what to do about it. And you find yourself, maybe you're feeling in a rut. Maybe it's a pattern that keeps coming up in sex or relating. Maybe it has to do with money or work or whatever the thing is. But knowing that you're ready to make a change, but not necessarily knowing how, that's usually where it takes finding resources. Again, I typically recommend working with someone rather than trying to self-help. There's a ton of information out there, books and online articles and podcasts and YouTubes and all sorts of things that tempt us into a path of doing it ourselves. It's really hard to take on by yourself. It really, really helps to have someone hold you, to hold space, to help you stay accountable, to offer insights. You might read something. There's a famous book in the kind of conscious sexuality for men world called The Multi-Orgasmic Man by Montauk Chia, that many men read. It's a great book to read. And there's things that, are a bit outdated. And for someone that's trying to walk that path, might get frustrated by and might not be able to become this multi-orgasmic man that the book promises. And so having someone that's knowledgeable in that area that can actually guide you and, talk you through ways to make adjustments, keep you motivated, keep you going, keep you accountable, give you, practices, exercises. So I when people get into that consciously incompetent state, I do recommend finding a person or people that can support, coaches, therapists, facilitators, like retreat facilitators, mentors, whatever it is. So that would be my first answer. And when you're ready for that help, just even speaking and asking, then you'll start to become aware of those people. And then I would also say, there's also a lot of people that are really good at marketing themselves. Like you might see a lot of people on Instagram that are marketing themselves in this way that really speaks to you, and interview and ask a lot of questions and find the people that you really resonate with, that you think will actually be able to support you, and lean into the interviews and questions and kick the tires a little bit, because not everyone is for everyone, and that's actually okay.
Yeah.
There's going to be coaches that maybe helped someone have the most amazing sex life, or increase their business 10x or whatever, that don't actually work for you. They're just not your style, and that's okay. And so spend the time to find someone that, or someone's multiple people that work for you.
Yeah.
Retreats are a nice step into it because they tend to be a kind of a concentrated time in which to focus on yourself. There's tons of really beautiful Tantra retreats around the world. Tantric retreats could be more focused on sexuality or not focused on sexuality at all. And so if that's the route that you want to go, there's a whole wide variety of things to look into. And as you take steps on the personal development path, you'll meet other people along the path and ask them, what's your path and who are you working with? And you can share stories and share resources. And so it starts to snowball and then kind of this whole wide, I describe it as like floating down a river, and there's all these tributaries, and you can paddle towards one or you can paddle towards another, and they're all options lying out in front of you. And I do, especially with anything where there's a sense of trauma, and without going into like a whole lecture on trauma, there's various degrees of trauma that, is trauma, like with a big T, and trauma with a little T. I think everyone in the world has experienced some form of little T trauma. Big T trauma would be, things like, witnessing someone being shot, for example, or, car accidents, or, severe abuse and rape cases, things like that. Especially if like family members or close relatives that are supposed to be safe and trusted are involved. Really critical to work with people that are specially trained for trauma. And in the world of sexuality, asking questions about the level of trauma awareness that you might, of what the practitioner you might be considering working with has.
Yeah.
Because if someone doesn't have any trauma training whatsoever, if you get triggered in something, you need to know that the person that you're trusting is going to know how to support you through that. They might not be able to, fully, walk you through unwinding the trauma, but you need to know that you can be safely held in that.
Yeah.
And having experienced what it's like to go into a trauma state, working with someone that knows how to deal with trauma is absolutely important. And I'm trying to imagine what it would have been like. It would have been more traumatizing to go into a trauma state and to be held by someone that didn't know how to hold me through that. Because then it would have just sent me further and further into the cycle. So that would be something also to be aware of, is the level of trauma awareness and trauma informed that someone has, and ask the questions, and then to work with me. Right now, what I'm my biggest enjoyment comes with working with men through their sexuality, helping men become more embodied. I'd say more embodied, so coming into their body, feeling more pleasure, feeling more connected, having bigger, better orgasms, being more attuned to their partner, being educated, just what sex can be, just bringing more tools to the toolkit, and just allowing kind of for the expanded possibility of this big, wide range of sexuality, and empowered. So feeling empowered to be a sexual being, to identify what your turn-ons are, and to own your desires, and to be able to ask for your desires, and to be able to hold space for someone else to share their desires, and then to be able to, find the meeting ground.
And you're doing this online and offline?
Online and in person. Yeah, it depends where people are located.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's very powerful work. And something that really needs more attention, because men need to be held by other men. And this power and the healing that comes from it opens so many doors in regards to navigate through life with an internal sovereign and with an internal navigation system, so that you can feel yourself. But also working, and also helps to really feel the trust between the internal energies again, like the heart and the mind, the passion, the feeling, the emotional body.
I think there is space for men to work with women.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with several women and I got a lot out of it. But there's a very unique something about working with a man, working with someone that has the felt sense of man stuff, men's sexuality. Maybe it's, things around performance, erectile challenges, premature ejaculation, the pressures of man, making money or being tough, not expressing emotions, the conditions around, aggression and masculinity and those things, to work with someone that's also been through that and has that deep sense of like felt sense of empathy, is something pretty unique.
I think again, like the many layers of the onion, like being really multifaceted in regards to what do I need right now? Do I need right now someone who helps me to really get me deeper into my femininity? So yes, I'm going to go for a woman. Do I need someone who really, like, I'm talking like the woman now, because there's a lot of women's circle out there, which is like a huge benefit for us women to really connect, to really like go deeper into our femininity and to really experience not the competition, like the love and the power of like sisterhood. In regards to that, there's also the same vice versa with men, why men circles are so powerful, to speak openly about the rage, like emotions, the deep sense of shame, guilt, with whatever comes with it. And I feel then there's all the power of combining two energies together. And this is just my personal experience when I was working and still working with male mentors. I'm so thankful, first of all, that we are here and we have this conversation. And you mentioned so many gold nuggets and so many like beautiful, deep knowledge of wisdom that came out in today's session. And I'm 100% sure that there's so much for everyone in it. I mean, for me, there's a lot of gold nuggets in it. So I can just like believe that it's going to the right person as well. To close out that, I always have the one question, because this podcast is named Masculinity Now. What does masculinity mean for you?
What does masculinity mean to me? It's so interesting that you asked that question. If you had asked me that 5-6 years ago, I wouldn't have an answer.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that it feels to me now, feels like the qualities that I feel when I consider masculinity is I feel stability, presence is a big one. That really pure presence to me feels like a very like masculine energy. There's like a strength. There's I'd say those are like the kind of the core elements when I really feel into masculinity. There can be things like providing. There's some men that like providing, being able to provide, being able to protect, feel very masculine. For me, those are also, like, now that I speak them, those are also important traits, which probably go back to our caveman days. There's something around like, and maybe this is just knowing the way men are wired around rationality. Men tend to be more rational versus women tend to be more emotional, but I don't want to just like blanket statement that's what masculinity means to me. But that was something else that was popping up. So yeah, let me just summarize. Presence, stability, strength, provider and protector instincts, I think those are probably my cornerstones of masculinity as I'm feeling into all the words that are flowing around through my head right now.
Yeah. That's beautiful. What do you believe? What do you feel is the most?
And actually, I'll add one more, which is for a man this was just coming up. That's kind of fully integrated within himself. The ability to open his heart, and so going back to Tantra, the unionization, the vulnerability with the strength, the love with the presence. Being able to be the provider, but also to ask for support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's powerful. My last question would have been, what is the most powerful or most, not powerful, but necessary emotion? Can you say necessary emotion in regards to how does a man and a woman need to feel in order to express their sexuality?
The most powerful emotion in order to express their sexuality.
How should they feel when they're opening up to a man or a woman?
I think it's all of the above. It's a sense of emotional fluidity with a sense of safety in the ability to.
Yeah.
I've had circumstances where I've made love to a partner and ended up in a heap on the floor, laughing so hard I was crying or crying so hard I was laughing, and I don't know which way it went, and it probably went both ways, and it wasn't attached to words that said why, but those were the emotions that were coming out. There were so many emotions flowing through me that like tears were coming, and I was laughing and crying, and I remember her kind of looking at me, both kind of in appreciation and also like, wow, I wonder what's going on in there, because it was just it was kind of funny, and also witnessing that in women too, making love and seeing the tears come, but there could be other things that come up, there could be anger that comes out after a thing that just needs to be released, or there could be joy, there could be I think at its core also safety. And while I say that, I also recognize that there are some people that have an erotic wiring around taboo, where something that doesn't necessarily feel safe can be a path to eroticism. But being able to experience that unsafety safely, I think, can actually be a really powerful experience. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Amazing answer. Thank you so much. Before we close this episode today, is there anything on your heart that you feel you want to share?
I think it's just it's the notion that no one is broken.
Yeah.
That every single person, I truly believe every single person has the ability to change their life and make these changes for themselves. I say this, with a relatively privileged place in the world and recognizing there's millions of, billions of people that, live in poverty, and it's challenging just to survive. So I do recognize that. And I recognize as humans, if given the right circumstances, have the ability to make these changes. And permission for it to be nonlinear. It might be 2 steps forward, 1 step back with a little shake to shake side to side. But if you zoom out far enough, it's still growing up and to the right. And so it's just the invitation for self-compassion, that people are not too broken for anything. That this is all accessible, this freedom that we talked about, this self-liberation that we talked about.
Yeah.
This ease and grace, no matter the life circumstances, is all available. And if that sounds interesting, to lean into that and to take that first step.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Seriously, like my heart is bursting. It's really wide open. This conversation was really powerful. And I'm thanking you from the bottom of my heart that you shared today your past and your wisdom that comes with it. It's really powerful.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and having the curiosity and also the kind compassion to hold space for me to be vulnerable and create that safety for me. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to today's episode on Masculinity Now with Arabella Tornau. And thank you for your interest in your heart. If you like this podcast, please like, share, and subscribe, so more people who can benefit from it can be reached. Take care, and we hear us soon.